think all of us have some stories we could share about conflicts we have experienced at work. Sometimes we even dread going to work because of the stress that we know that's waiting there for us. Joining us today to learn how to better deal with this is Dr. Paul White. He's a psychologist, a consultant, and co-authors of a new book. Actually, not such a new book, but Making Things Right at Work, which is available at appreciationatwork.com. Welcome to Bridge City News, Dr. White. This book sounds like such a success. We were talking a little bit offline there, and it's such an interesting topic. So conflict in the workplace, this is an area you specialize in. In fact, it's in my opinion, one of the most asked questions in job interviews. So how do you deal with conflict in the workplace?
Well, there's a lot of different things you can do because there's different kinds of conflict. And in fact, some people don't connect with the word conflict as much as tension or friction, that they sort of don't feel like, well, I'm not in a fight. But a lot of it has to do with some very simple kinds of things like miscommunication between people that, I thought you were going to call that client yesterday and you thought I was, and we come today and we realize nobody did and, have to deal with that. Or different expectations about situations, about whether you pulled off an event and one person thinks it went pretty well and then another person thinks that, boy, we left a lot that still could be done better. And so it's there. We're people, we make mistakes, we don't communicate real well. And so really I've found that it's more important for business leaders to not focus so much on avoiding conflict, but building tools on how to deal with it once it's there.
Now, we were chatting, you co-authored this book with, is it Gary Chapman? He's the author
Right.
of The 5 Love Languages. So maybe talk about how that came to be.
Yeah, so I consult with family-owned businesses and deal with the relational issues there. And in doing so, found that family members, I had one father said, I think the plan for succession is going well. And the son said, it's a disaster. I can't ever please my dad. And there was a gap there. And so, I thought, well, maybe the 5 love languages could apply to work. So I approached Dr. Chapman, and 10 years ago, we wrote that book, The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace. And it's been used by lots of companies, and we have an online assessment that goes with it. And then over time, we've written on toxic workplaces, and then this one on sort of the practical ways to help deal with conflict at work.
It's such a meaty topic and one that unfortunately doesn't seem to go away, does it? So businesses actually hire you to come and teach their leaders and staff how to resolve conflict in the workplace. But you obviously can't be everywhere at the same time. So can reading this book potentially change an entire work environment?
Well, I think the key word is potentially. Just reading the book probably won't, but reading it and then applying some of the concepts clearly can. And that's one of the cool things that we've been able to help organizations. A few weeks ago, we had a feature article written on our work in the New York Times in the Sunday business section. And so it works. And some of it is just real practical kinds of things like be direct in your communication versus indirect, in the sense that you tell people what you think in a kind way, but don't try to go around people or don't tell somebody else to send a message or don't gossip, because that just sort of creates an untrusting kind of environment. And the other thing is to lots of times when we have a tense situation, we react real quick and sort of shoot our mouth off or get too angry. And another practical thing is just to slow down, just take a breath, sort of wait, maybe ask a question of clarifying and say, I'm sort of confused. I thought we were doing this, but I'm hearing this now. So can you explain that to me? And just really sort of basic listening, active listening skills, communication skills can really help keep things from getting out of control.
It could potentially avoid that blow up, right? Because many of us probably tend to express anger in different forms when we run into that conflict with that coworker, so that's good advice there. Stop and reassess, take a breath, and maybe just ask them for clarification. Great advice. So a lot of employees say that they don't feel appreciated of their hard work. So how can managers and coworkers learn how to show appreciation more effectively?
Yeah, and that's really the key to the 5 languages of appreciation. One is that a lot of people confuse appreciation and employee recognition, which is can be a good thing if it's done right, but recognition is largely about performance. We believe appreciation includes that, but it's about the person because we're not just work units, right? We're not just sort of production units, but we're people. We have lives and we have characteristics that are valuable beyond production. I like to work with cheerful people more than grumpy people. And so, I can call attention to that to a team member who's got a nice smile and a great laugh. And the other part is that when people hear the word appreciation, they think mainly about words, saying thanks or giving a compliment. But our research, and we've had over 350,000 people take our online assessment, finds that people want to be appreciated in different ways. There's words, there's quality time, which could be individual time or it could be hanging out with your colleagues and friends. An act of service can be when you're working on a really tough project, time limited, what somebody can do to help you get through that. Tangible gifts is another language. It's not bonuses and raises, but it's just small things that show that you're getting to know your colleague. So like their favorite cup of coffee or maybe a magazine. If they're going to plant a garden, you say, hey, I know you're going to do that. I thought you might enjoy this. And then even physical touch. And physical touch is the one that people, we're going to get sued.
Especially in the
But,
workplace, right?
well, yeah, but what we found is physical touch is just spontaneous celebration, right? It's a high five when you finish a project. It's a fist bump when you solve a problem, and can be a congratulatory handshake. But it's interesting that over half of the employees that we've assessed want a different language than words. Words is sort of the big one. It's still about 45% of the employees, but if you only use words, you're going to miss the mark. And so we've created an assessment as well as a book and then some training materials to help leaders and colleagues communicate it because it's not just top down from leaders, it includes colleagues as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. So really, you really are going through those 5 love languages, like what a couple would do with the acts of service and the words of affirmation and stuff. So really, those can almost be applied to almost any relationship in our lives then, can't they?
Absolutely, absolutely. And they look different at work than they do in personal relationships with friends and family. And that's why with our assessment and people that maybe know what their personal love language is, actually their language of appreciation may be different because of the setting and context. And in our assessment, we identify the specific actions that a person wants because quality time is a really important one. In the old days, those of us are older, it meant time with your supervisor or manager. But more and more for younger workers, they want to hang out with their friends and colleagues, go out to lunch, go out afterwards. And so you could get the right language, but miss the action and still sort of miss the target.
Okay, that's interesting. Now, how often do we make assumptions about others at work or about a particular situation? And why does this tend to cause problems?
Well, unfortunately, it seems like we do a lot. And the assumption is about their motivation of why they did something versus sort of giving them the benefit of the doubt. Unfortunately, we sort of attribute negative motivations that, maybe a person's criticizing the event that we helped, lead. And you say, man, you say to yourself, at least, they're trying to throw me under the bus and make me look bad. When in actuality, they may just want to make it better next time. And, it's hard enough. We usually have mixed motives ourselves. Our motives usually aren't totally pure. And so it's hard enough to figure out our own motivation, let alone somebody else's. And so we really encourage people to give sort of the benefit of the doubt, ask questions, figure out what's up, and don't overreact for sure.
That's a really good point. I could see how those assumptions could happen, especially in a work environment where there may be competition, right? Those competitive environments, I could see how that could completely happen.
One of the key sort of concepts that we believe is that employees are people, and the way that we get along better often is to get to know the person, because usually there's some touchstones and touch points where we can identify and understand them better, so that we're not just totally guessing and coming from our own perspective solely.
Yeah, great advice. How about communication? What kinds of miscommunication can cause conflict, and how can we improve on this?
It's interesting. As a psychologist, I used to teach master's level counselors. It's the same skills we teach counselors, and it's what's called active listening. And it's that simple thing of when you hear somebody say something, before you respond, especially if it's sort of a large amount of information, it's good to summarize and say, okay, so you're saying, that from your perspective, the event went okay. There's some things that we can improve, and maybe plan ahead more or whatever. And so then they have the opportunity to clarify, because lots of times we assume we hear correctly, that we've heard everything, and also those of us that are speaking don't always communicate our thoughts clearly. We may say it a little different than what we're thinking, and so just having that pause to say, is this what you're saying, and then
Yeah,
move
kind of
forward.
fill in
That
the
can, that
gaps
can
there.
exactly, it can really smooth a lot of things out.
Uh-huh. Okay, so you write that good character and integrity is crucial for a healthy workplace. So, what do you mean by this, and why is it so important?
Well, we found that to build trust in relationships, there's really three important things, and there's C's. One is competence. If you're going to trust somebody in the workplace, you got to believe that they're going to be able to do the task. Secondly, consistency, that they're going to show up, or they're going to do it, get it done on time, maybe in the right quality level. And then character. And in this sense, we're talking about character of integrity, of following through on what you agreed to. But really, trust is also built that you believe that the other person's looking out for your interests as well as their own, so that they're not just using this to manipulate it so that they look good and you look bad. And so we find that it's really important to demonstrate that you say what you mean, and that as you work together on a team, you consider other people's interests, and perspectives too, because we almost always think that our way is right, but it's not always the only right way or the only piece that we need to consider.
Here's a big one. So, when we mess up at work, like,
That never happens.
it never happens. Everybody at one point in time has messed up at work. So, how do we deal with that? It can sometimes be challenging to own up to it. So, should we apologize for anything and everything that goes wrong, or how do we know what warrants an apology exactly?
Yeah, yeah. I think no, we shouldn't apologize for anything and everything. And some people do, and it sort of gets in the way, right? But I think when we've done something or not done something that created some negative event or consequence, either to the organization or to some of our teammates, I think it's reasonable to consider apologizing. And the first thing is just to accept responsibility and say, I didn't do that the way I should have. Sorry about that. And part of that is, sort of being sorry for the negative consequences. You don't have to take full responsibility for everything, because that's usually not the case. But you say, man, I'm sorry that I was late in getting this, and I see how it created some stress for you. And just starting there, and our colleague, Dr. Jennifer Thomas, and Dr. Chapman have written a book, The Five Languages of Apology. And there's a fuller way to apologize. But if you at least start with those, accept responsibility, and sort of say, I'm sorry for the negative results that happened, it's a good way to get going at
Wow,
least.
saying I'm sorry, it's a whole chapter, a whole book on itself. Who knew? Who knew there were so many ways to apologize? So, what about rebuilding relationships with people that we have had conflict with at work numerous times? Maybe how do we put it behind us and move forward? It creates really awkward situations sometimes.
It does, and I think the apologizing fits in there, or at least calling attention to the tension and say, I know we've had our differences over the past, and that's what it was, and I know that's there. But I really do want to work together with you, and you try to move forward. If you just sort of blow through it and don't acknowledge the tension or whatever, it feels really weird. And that's where building trust is, and we have a couple of chapters on that, as far as most of us, when we think about trust or building a relationship, we think about it globally. Like, I don't trust, Bob, or I don't trust Rebecca. But it's really situation specific. It's like, I'm not sure Bob can handle that project solely by himself, or I'm not sure that Rebecca, has the skills to really handle this large client. And so what that does is it allows us to specify the situation, and then look at those three C's of competence, consistency, and character, and build a plan to help rebuild that. Whether that's you having a hard time trusting the other person, or maybe another person having a hard time trusting you, and say, where do I need to grow in this? And and specify that and work on it together.
Okay. Any advice on how to deal with a boss who tends to be critical or unappreciative or unrealistic expectations?
Yeah, we did research on toxic workplaces and literally toxic leaders, and it's called Rising Above a Toxic Workplace. And there's a difference between sort of a difficult boss or somebody that you're, just different from, and a toxic leader. A toxic leader really is somebody who is all about themselves, and everything is for them. They use people, they withhold information, they distort information. You probably want to get away from those kind of people, the really toxic ones. The tougher ones, I find a helpful strategy is to have somebody that you can use as a sounding board, because we get in our own head and our own history and emotions, and we maybe aren't interpreting things right, and say, when he said this in the meeting, it really hurt me or it agitated me. How did you hear that? And get some input from people that you trust their judgment, and that helps us be able to sort of maintain a reality base. That's part of the problem of COVID and remote working. When we get by ourselves for a long time, we get weird because we don't interpret things correctly. And so we need feedback from others.
All right. Well, it looks like we are out of time, but thanks so much for being with us today, Dr. White. Appreciate having you on.
You bet. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.